wonderful to be here. Yakov, thank you for inviting me. It's especially good to be here during these times. And I also want to thank a colleague and friend of mine, Regine Shevach, who's been kind of my spiritual leader when it comes to things in Israel. She's introduced me to so many important leaders and scientists, and it's just wonderful to be here. As I've spent much of my career in the United States, I'm going to start this talk with a couple of disclaimers. Legal disclaimers. First disclaimer is I'm not talking on behalf of any of the organizations which I head or where I'm part of. I'm just talking about my own experience. Disclaimer 2 is this is not an academic paper. I'm just, again, mostly talking about my personal experience. And the last disclaimer is, believe me, I'm not going to pontificate about AI in drug discovery, okay? I've spent tons of money on NVIDIA GPUs, H100s, and so on, but I leave that to the people who really understand the topic. So what I'm trying to talk about is what makes innovation successful and what are hindrances to innovation. And I will try to use a couple of examples. And as a CEO of Merck in the past, I had the great opportunity to learn about, in addition to biopharma R&D and commercialization, to learn about life science tools, and to also learn about the innovation mechanisms and dynamics within semiconductor through the Merck electronics business. And I've learned how critically important novel research platforms are for biomedical progress. I had the opportunity to also experience how interactions happen, for instance, between suppliers to Samsung or TSMC or NVIDIA in the electronics business, and how very different that is compared to biomedical research, where often biotechs or pharma companies work without enough context, without enough contact also with the end customer. I now work mostly as an investor, as a chairman or an advisor to biotech startups. And in this context, I feel it is of paramount importance for individuals and teams who are contemplating the idea of creating a biopharma startup to have a deep and fundamental understanding of molecular pathomechanisms in disease and in health. And the simple questions like what is broken, what needs to be fixed, and what state do we want to reach after therapy are absolutely critical. I personally am looking for teams that clearly understand also patient benefit. I'm teams early that try to establish highly accurate financial NPVs of early stage projects make me nervous, and I try to stay away from them. So I think empathy for patient needs is very, very important. And in addition to understanding pathophysiology, I'm looking for teams that often also master novel platforms or try to apply established platforms to completely new areas. And such modalities, examples would be mRNA, obviously, ADCs, organoids, DNA origami, RNAi, and many others. Draw also mentioned bioconvergence as a major factor going forward, and I happen to completely agree with him. Biomedical research and development is moving away from the classical trial and error approach to engineering type of work. Let me talk a little bit about innovation ecosystems. I will try to discuss 3 factors in the context of innovation ecosystems. First, academic, cultural aspects. Secondly, government or national policies. And thirdly, the role of the capital markets. And what is it that functioning innovation ecosystems have in common? From my point of view, the most important basis of innovation systems is a thriving academic and research scenes. Yet, we find excellence in academic research in quite a few geographies, and this doesn't necessarily translate always into a functioning technology or biotech founding ecosystem. I would like to state that my home country, Germany, is a fitting example for that pattern. We have top-notch research at institutions such as the Technical University of Munich, Heidelberg or Aachen, and the Max Planck and Fraunhofer Institutes. But historically, not enough of that is being translated into new businesses. And I will come back to why I believe this has been the case and why there are still impediments to progress. Functioning ecosystems are sometimes nationally based. Israel would be an example. Often they have a more regional character, such as Silicon Valley, Cambridge, and many others. They often originate in government policy and a subsequent early cooperation of academia, military, intelligence agencies, corporates, and venture funds. Israel is a particularly good example with a high-level government focus on fostering innovation and the creation of respective institutions such as the Israeli Innovation Authority. The two Israeli research institutions I have personally mostly worked with are the Weizmann Institute and Hebrew University. Yaakov, you and I, we did quite a few interesting deals with spin-offs of Hebrew University. Both these institutions have, interestingly, a very different approach to founding and tech transfer, but both are successful. Weizmann, with its tech transfer unit YEDA, doesn't encourage scientists to be business founders, but focuses on institutional tech transfer. While Hebrew University has a proud record of spin-offs and actually encourages its researchers to be founders. And both approaches seem to work. I found that fascinating. What I also found fascinating is that many founders, Israeli founders that I've met, have actually met during their time at the IDF. And then they went on to successfully building companies in their life afterward. Something, however, my Israeli friends tell me with a certain degree of chagrin, and that repeatedly, is that given the high power of innovation in Israel, not enough companies develop to maturity and exits happen often early and businesses often move to the United States. It is commonplace knowledge that Silicon Valley has been set up by the Department of Defense and is such an example of a successful innovation ecosystem. Much of what we use today on a day-to-day basis in terms of digital platforms, data analysis systems, and AI comes out of a military use logic. European universities, which often still operate under the so-called civil clause, i.e. the refusal to work on defense projects, are at a significant disadvantage. The Boston area followed its own, but actually not so completely different path. We shall see what impact current policy decisions in the US, for instance, regarding the FDA, NIH, CDC, will have for the competitiveness of the US biopharma scene. I don't dare to make any projections in this regard. Other examples of successful innovation ecosystems are South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and in particular China. These countries have very different approaches, but there was always an early accord between government and business to develop leadership in certain technologies. It is, for instance, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating to see how Korea has developed into a world-leading biologics manufacturing powerhouse within a period of about only 10 years, basically starting from scratch. Many observers had been super optimistic about China's ascent to become a leader in biopharma research. The mood had become rather pessimistic, however, over the past 5 years, and it's interesting to see that given the current impressive output of Chinese biotechs, the mood is changing again 180 degrees, and we should expect very significant developments coming from there. You may have also realized that I didn't mention India in my list. While I'm a fan of India and the country has so many talented researchers, engineers, and entrepreneurs, my point of view is that its unclear attitude to effective intellectual property protection seems to be a hindrance, specifically in the field of biopharma. We should also expect that Middle Eastern players, in particular Saudi and UAE, will establish themselves soon as sizable players, both in financing and executing biopharma innovation. As I am a European, my main concern is Europe's competitiveness in this area. Europe has, beyond any doubt, outstanding academic research. Yet, why are a majority of successful startups developing in the US and in Asia and not in Europe? In addressing this question, I want to come back to the three factors that I had mentioned earlier, and I start with academic culture. Again, a little disclaimer, I don't want to be overly negative, and things have changed drastically and positively in this respect. A super positive example is the Technical University of Munich, so-called Unternehmertum, translated means entrepreneurship initiative, where an excellent university with the help of high-power family offices have created one of the world's most exciting startup ecosystems. And similar things are happening in France, in the UK, in the Netherlands, and the Nordic countries. Yet, we have lost time with many academic institutions having had, and many still having, a skeptical approach to founding and spin-offs. These universities are often dominated by social sciences and the arts that sometimes seem to have an almost anti-business attitude. Many academic institutions that are trying to change, yet they are putting up bureaucratic barriers against researchers founding companies, and they often have highly unrealistic expectations regarding royalties and IP. As stated, much is developing in the right direction, but some of the old thinking is still prevailing. Coming to the financial markets. The financial markets differ significantly between the United States and Europe. Both the US and Europe are home to highly engaged family offices that are often providing the pre-seed and seed money also for biotech startups. Yet when it comes to institutional investors, differences are huge. In the interest of time, I will somewhat oversimplify. Yes, we also have some strong European-based VCs, and we have some corporate VCs. Yet US-based VCs are significantly larger and more successful. US capital markets are strong because of pension funds and similar players, and universities have significant endowments. While there are some positive exceptions in Europe, such as the Netherlands and the UK, most European countries have primarily debt and tax, i.e. not savings, financed pension systems. More or less, the only serious institutional financial players in Europe are insurances and reinsurances. And given European regulations, insurances can, even if they wanted, not invest into venture-like activities. In essence, there is hardly a European capital market to support innovation. Sovereign wealth funds are an exception in Europe, maybe Norway. France has done a superb job in creating a state fund with BPI. The Netherlands have done a great job, but it's far too little is happening in Europe. I need to hurry up. So many of my colleagues and I have been in contact with several European governments in order to bring about change, and I feel that Europe understands the need to get its act together on defense and defense innovation, and that may also foster change in our area. A couple of words about pharma. Big pharma and big biotech are currently trading at historically low EBITDA multiples. If we exclude the three positive outliers, Novo, AstraZeneca and Eli Lilly, big pharma, big biotech is trading at 8 times EBITDA. That is, if you compare that to consumer companies like people who make hygienic wipes or chocolate bars or so, they often trade at 15 to 16 times EBITDA. And interestingly, pharma suppliers such as Life Science Tools companies trade at 20 times EBITDA. So obviously, the financial markets have very little confidence in the current pharma model. And why is that so? I think it's still related to the so-called E-Rooms law. That's the reversal of Moore's law in semiconductor, Eroom's law that was developed by Jack Scannell, a well-known sell-side analyst, basically says that every 9 years, the cost of developing a novel compound in pharma doubles. But the output overall stays the same or actually goes down. Let me try to skip over a couple of things. This law has been shown to be true, and I think that is the major factor. I have been chairman of the World Pharma Association, the European Pharma Association, and I've discussed with many of my CEO colleagues what are the reasons why, what are the main obstacles to pharma success, and people were talking about market access and pricing and US healthcare reform, and I don't know what. From my point of view, it is the extremely rising cost of R&D, and we need to bring about change. And the reason for that is that I feel that the regulatory system always stays a couple of steps behind research. It is crazy that we don't fully accept organoid research nowadays, that we don't accept modeling for placebo groups, etc. If you work with startups and academic institutions, you see that you can do clinical trials at one-tenth of the cost. So I feel that regulatory reform will be the most important aspect to progress. And now I'm basically at the end. And let me say a couple of words to wrap up. I would suggest that we shouldn't worry so much. We should be rather happy these days that we have these new tools at hand, all these wonderful new scientific tools that will bring about progress. Let's do a great job at that and not worry so much about all the environmental factors. I see positive signals with regard to change, and I will use my energy and my working capacity to continue to work with Israel, with Israeli research, with Israeli innovation, to connect Israeli companies and other institutions with international players. Again, thank you for inviting me. I love being here. Bye-bye.